Well, for those of you who don't know Brad DeLong, he's a professor of economics here at UC Berkeley, has been for a while. He also did a stint at the US Treasury Department in the 90s in the Clinton administration, working under Larry Summers, which has got some stories behind that one.
As Gene Sperling once said, being Larry's friend is never dull.
It's never dull, exactly.
Yes.
But I think most people outside of kind of those circles know of him through his blog, in which he delves deeply into economics and politics, and is quite prolific and quite good at the social media, which he's probably still banging at right here as he sits on stage. So, Brad, one of the themes that's emerged here, particularly in a couple of conversations I've had earlier today, but also through the whole day, is this sense of technology, artificial intelligence, automation, robotics. We had drones here. There's a lot of kind of sense of how the technology is pushing us in different directions and kind of disrupting life as we know it, and in fact going to continue to push it, disrupt it, and potentially displace a lot of folks in the economy that's to come. And so I think just to open it up, given that you're economist perspective, why don't you give us a little sense of the way you think about the kind of the disruption that comes with a lot of these new technologies.
Okay, well first, the disruption's been going on for 225 years at least, right? The pace at which things have been disrupted has been accelerating, yes. You know, at the start of the 18th century, the amount of technological progress we get in 1 year, it took them 20. By the start of the 19th century, it was down to about 1 in 5. By the start of the 20th century, it took kind of 2 years to get the amount of technological progress we got in 1 year. But it did produce enormous dislocations. Andrew Carnegie's father is kind of sitting at Holmes' home in Scotland, making a pretty good living by being a skilled weaver at his hand loom, when all of a sudden technological improvements 300 miles north, the power loom destroys his livelihood. I don't know whether he starves to death or whether simply his children's immune systems are so badly compromised by their poor nourishment that they die like flies. But Andrew makes it to America, promptly gets an entry-level job in the high-tech sector as one of the first telegraph operators. One of the first people who actually exit their business to sit in front of the telegraph and communicate across hundreds of miles with others instantaneously. And we're off and running. And indeed, the fact this has been going on for quite a while is, I think, the thing that most made that illuminate in my mind with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs was an article that, by chance, I was discussing with other economists at the Qualcomm Cafe up on Berkeley campus earlier today. A wonderful article in a Wired magazine of long ago by Neil Stevenson about the submarine telegraph cables of the 19th century. An article called Mother Earth Motherboard that I just discovered Peter edited. And I can say managed to edit Neil Stevenson so that it's not only is every paragraph a diamond of prose, but the thing has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Demonstrates true genius.
Thank you.
Okay. Say, extending that, if you want to take the really long sweep of history, up until 6,000 years ago, by and large, the kind of things that we invented were things that allowed us to use our human capabilities to do what we did, but do what we did better, and to do kind of everything that we did. Spears allow us to actually hunt large things as opposed to throwing rocks at them in the hopes you get a lucky hit. Actually picking the grained pieces of grass that have really big seeds, which we then turn into wheat, allows us to harvest a lot more calories in our daily gathering if we've been lucky enough to scatter the seeds by the riverbank the year before. The invention of the loom allows us to actually weave our grasses into cloth much more effectively, but we're using all of our standard Paleolithic human capacities to do so. Then in 6000 BC, something unusual happens. We domesticate the horse. All of a sudden, having people pull things is obsolete. Strong backs, strong thighs are very useful whenever you have big things to move around. But once you got a horse can do it better. And then over the past 6,000 years, first slowly and then more rapidly, we've had more and more places where things that it used to be a human excellence to do, that our machines and our draft animals and our domesticated animals are doing it better. Yeah, we got the horse. It kind of takes care of backs. We get the automatic spinning jenny and the assembly line. They kind of take care of fingers. We no longer are useful for moving things around with our big muscles or finally manipulating things with our small muscles. I find that on this thing, in terms of nagging me to actually move around, say the Withings program is significantly better than telling my wife to make sure I move around once an hour, because she says, but you'll snap at me. And I can't snap at this no matter how many frowny faces, right, it gives to me.
But do you think this next generation of the AI, brain power, kind of robotics that take to the next level, do you think there's any material difference between this?
I don't know, right? Up until now, it's been the case that every time we've domesticated an animal or invented a machine, it's removed the market value from some human capabilities, but every draft animal, every milk animal, every machine, it requires a cybernetic control mechanism to guide it. And, the human brain is a supercomputer that fits inside a bread box and draws only 50 watts of power. That's a very impressive cybernetic control mechanism. And so up until now, whenever you had a horse guiding task or a machine running task or a machine programming task or an accounting task, you had to have a human in the loop to control what the machines and what the software were doing. But now, for the first time, we can dimly envision the coming of an age in which machines will be smart enough that they no longer really need human minders to control them. We already know that a simple computer with the proper big data regression program could do a significantly better job at picking graduate students in economics who are likely to succeed than the faculty committees we currently assign it, because faculty committees are inevitably struck by stories that resonate, which almost always lead to them placing too high a weight on replicating themselves, and also giving too high a weight to the recommendations from their friends, from people who are in their social network. Yeah. And the computer is an intelligence vast and cool and unsympathetic. It doesn't suffer from those biases. And it's reached the stage where it can crunch the data as well as I can. So maybe we're approaching peak human. That since our last really strong comparative advantage was the ability of our brains to serve as cybernetic control mechanisms, maybe that's coming to an end.
But that doesn't seem to worry you, right? If the same way that we were checking a little bit this before, like if a lot of that's taken away, what's the possible way this could play out in a way in the economics?
There are two roads. And the first road is the road in which we genuinely have Turing-capable machines and software assistants that can actually do for us everything that a human can do, that can serve as super-intelligent Jeeveses to our Booty Woosters, keeping the trains running and keeping us with our inept lack of knowledge and bumblingness from creating chaos and catastrophe and causing our rich ants, who we hope will eventually leave us money, to be angry at us. Very much like what happens in the science fiction novels of the unfortunately late E.M. N. Banks and his culture, where every person has a robotic, artificially intelligent drone that follows them around and makes sure their life doesn't crash into chaos. And the drones do this because it simply amuses them. to have something to do in the real world while they use the rest of their brain power to do whatever else they want to do. As Paul Krugman says, if we get to that world, well, then what we really have are not robots but slaves. And in that case, we face the robot uprising. But that's still very, very far away. The other possibility is that we should be looking not at science fiction for the image of our own future, but instead at Regency romance novels, at Georgette Heyer, kind of riffing essentially off of Jane Austen, who wrote about a social class in a society of material comfort that has absolutely no economic role whatsoever. Neither Mr. Bingley nor Mr. Darcy do a lick of socially useful work for their 5,000 or 10,000 pounds a year, and no one expects that they shall, or finds it odd that they do. And everyone thinks they're wonderful people because they're good masters, because they'll bring you a basket down from the manor house to you in your cottage if you're sick, or maybe forgive your rent for 2 months if you've managed to break your leg. It's a society of material abundance. And so the entire narrative force of, desperately trying to get the crops in before the hail comes and destroys them. The kind of Little House on the Prairie, kind of motive of we got to get the crop in before the locusts come and eat it or we're all going to die. All material scarcity and material advantage motives vanish. And so what do people then do? Well, if you look at the supermarket checkout line, you see people are interested in 3 things. First, avoiding violent death, especially for their children. Second, material comfort and fashion. And third, who's sleeping with whom. And so if you manage to produce a relatively safe society in which violent death is extremely rare, and if you get rid of material necessity as a spur, what you're left with is primarily the primary motives of human action and human society are then who is going to sleep with whom on the one hand, and the display of human excellence through the appreciation and exercise of fashion, right, on the other. This is the Regency romance world, and everyone in the ton of England in 1820 appears to be very happy doing it. Wearing the right coat, spending 2 hours a day tying their cravat so it looks exactly right, wearing the proper gown that properly complements their skin tone rather than clashing with it. And combine that with the great mating and affection dance, and they manage to keep themselves very busy indeed, without apparently feeling like their lives are empty.
So that assumes, of course, that society allowed for a very top of the society to actually act like that. So if we had this more mechanized society that would take care of, let's say, the basic material wants, the economy would have to be reorganized differently. And that does, in the near term, also deal with how do you deal with the displacement. Now, there has been some creative thinking around that from both the left and the right about guaranteed incomes and other things that essentially would liberate people off of this and actually not force people into kind of trauma that many people fear because of this. Talk a little bit about that transition.
If not, we have an immense problem. That we really have needed a guaranteed income since 1800. Yet whenever we haven't had it, the results of the social distress and terror have been absolutely enormous. And may I say, economists have more often than not been the bad guys on this. My favorite bête noire among economists, and in fact I was just reciting quotes from him to our brand new assistant professor, Danny Yegan, a brilliant person we're very lucky to hire at Berkeley this morning, was Nassau Senior, the first professor of political economy at Oxford, known for saying that England should not appropriate any money to help Andrew Carnegie's father and others who had been displaced from their handloom weaving occupations by the coming of the power loom, to keep them from dire material deprivation and possibly death. Because if you gave them money, they wouldn't look so hard for other occupations. It would take them longer to find other jobs, and you'd have to give them a great deal of money for a very long time, and it would be very expensive, and you probably wouldn't diminish the amount of human misery at all, because human misery was required as the spur to get people to get on their bikes and look for jobs. Say in response to the Irish potato famine. The potato crop fails because of monoculture and biological assault from nature. These 6 million people in Ireland start to starve. It's pretty clear that the population of Ireland is, sustainable population of Ireland, given the technology of the mid-19th century, is only 4 million. 1 million people, we think, die in the course of the Irish potato famine. And when the master of Balliol College at Oxford, Benjamin Jowett, asks Nassau Senior, how disastrous will this potato famine be? He says 1 million Irishmen will die, and that's not enough.
So
The
let's
idea is we need to have another million die.
Let's say we want to avoid
4
that.
million. And, you know, I mean, what you should do is you should say we should give them a guaranteed income. Or we should move them to Britain where there are plenty of jobs. Or we should send them off to Australia, to Chile, to Argentina, to Canada, the United States, where there's a great deal of work that can be done, and a great deal of trees that can be cut down, and a great deal of land that can be farmed. That people are useful and ingenious, and you should give them the power and ability to do so, rather than concluding that they're kind of social waste.
Now, this guaranteed income thing, which is interesting, is not just a kind of progressive thing, but there's roots in conservative thinking about this, too, that there's some possibility you could see common thinking on this.
There were roots in conservative thinking. Milton Friedman was always a very big backer of a simple negative income tax, something like the earned income tax credit we currently have, but more generous and not tied to your having a salary, which is what the one that Russell Long started and Clinton expanded had given to us, precisely because it was undignified to have to justify to the welfare office or the IRS why you deserved your check, and that the overwhelming proportion of what we produced, that was the joint collective product of everyone who has come before us. Right? That's our collective inheritance that has been given us for free by all the people who have lived before us, starting with the people in Catalhoyuk who noticed that the wheat plant had an extra big seed, continuing with the guy named Ishbal in 1200 BC, who decided that a stylized picture of an ox made a very good representation of the phoneme B, and we should adopt the alphabet, on down to here. And that a good society would be a relatively unequal society, but it wouldn't be a society of absolutely dire poverty. You know, but that's vanishing. That's vanishing from the right, especially that's vanishing from the right if the people who are kept out of poverty are the wrong people. Mm-hmm. You know, like I saw this last week when I was in Kansas City, Missouri, just across State Line Road from Kansas City, Kansas, where Governor Sam Brownback of Kansas was denouncing, say, I believe the bishops of Kansas, plus the meager and tiny and powerless Democratic Party of Kansas, for pushing for Kansas to expand Medicaid. Now, this really is a no-brainer. The people of Kansas are paying taxes to expand Medicaid all over the country. If they don't expand Medicaid, their taxes will go to us, and New York, and Colorado, and Arkansas, and Illinois, and now Pennsylvania. If they do expand Medicaid, they get some value for those taxes, and as long as Medicaid is not completely, totally, 100% useless, which it isn't, it's a no-brainer. But Brownback said he wasn't going to do it because Medicaid expansion was Barack Obama's Trojan horse to keep alive inner-city hospitals that were going to close and that ought to close. Yeah. Now, first, this is false. The inner city hospitals in Wichita, Topeka, and Kansas City are actually doing okay. It's rural hospitals, it's small rural hospitals in western Kansas that are going to close first. It's small rural hospitals that white people go to that are going to close first. But the only argument Brownback could think to make was that it's people who carry ghetto blasters in Kansas City are going to benefit from this hospital staying open, and we don't want them to do that, do we? It's scary in the prairie.
Yeah. Now, I tell you what, we don't have a ton of time here, and there's some interesting questions that are popping up here, and we've been talking long-term displacement of technology. You've given us a big picture lens. Right now, though, the pressing issue right here around us is just all over is this income inequality and this idea of our politics being trapped and unable to kind of deal with this. Any thoughts on what could be done relatively quickly, knowing what we know now or what we need to know soon, to actually really shift gears on this and make some big progress?
You know, higher taxes on the rich, more benefits for the poor. That's the first and most obvious thing. We have the least progressive tax and transfer system in the North Atlantic, and there's no reason why we should. Since we're still one of the richer countries in the North Atlantic, we should have a slightly more than average progressive tax and transfer system. We don't. The second thing, say back at the start of the 1970s, I think we made a collective mistake in deciding we should start charging for public colleges. And that made a certain kind of sense. People who are going to go for public colleges, going to go to public colleges and graduate will wind up being richer than average. Why should you tax taxpayers in general to give a subsidy to the students of Berkeley who are going to be middle class and upper middle class? Kind of having Berkeley charge tuition seemed to make sense, but it's kept an awful lot of people who ought to be going to college from going to, because they're scared of taking on student loan debt. And it's also enabled the growing up underneath the public colleges of a group of for-profit universities. University of Phoenix, right? Stanley Kaplan University, that until Jeff Bezos took it over was married to the Washington Post as part of its conglomerate, and so had outsized political influence. Public universities, or for-profit universities, that are unsuccessful in what they're doing and are little better than thieves. So eliminating the for-profit college industry, along with eliminating the payday loan industry, are, I think, the easy things that could be done most quickly. Third, we have an enormous problem with figuring out how to work our technology. Right? George Eastman was a marvelous innovator. He produced Kodak as we knew it, and brought middle-class prosperity to 50,000 engineers working for Kodak and to Rochester, New York, for a generation and a half. You know, Larry Page, right, Sergey Brin and Larry Page also had a truly genius idea, and they grabbed Eric Schmidt to make their company run and function, who had grown up a lot since the days that he was writing the Berkeley Unix clone in the basement of Evans Hall. But Google has not created the same kind of broad middle-class prosperity. It's created a much smaller number of very well-paid engineers and a few billionaires. Why did technology do one thing in the case of Kodak and the other in place of Google? Hell if I know. I really wish I did.
It could be a different kind of technology. Anyhow, it's unfortunate we ran out of time because we could probe your brain for a long time here. But he gave us a lot of food for thought and thoughts that we can continue in the rest of the conference here in the next couple of days. Thank you.
Okay.